So Howard, that is some film. And let me start by asking you the circumstances under which it was first shown and produced. I think that's a great way to start.
Interestingly enough, we showed that film at the Starbucks annual meeting of our shareholders last month. It was the 20th anniversary of our IPO. At every annual meeting, which thousands of Starbucks shareholders usually attend, we have in the past produced what I would loosely describe as a highlight film. And this year we decided that we wanted to, I think, integrate the shareholders meeting with a sense of purpose and really kind of ask the question, how can we as Starbucks use our scale for good when we feel a deep sense of responsibility beyond just making a profit?
And what was the reaction from the shareholders?
The reaction was overwhelming. I think that the rules of engagement for a public company today, I think, are changing. And what I mean by that is that profitability certainly is a fiduciary responsibility of every public company, but I believe strongly that there's a new movement to recognize that we have to serve the communities in a way that just isn't about taking money, ringing the register, but about achieving the balance between profitability and a social conscience.
Well, you know, it may be a new movement, but from the moment at least, it feels to me like a movement of one. And so what I want to do now is kind of delve into kind of where this came from. You know, the country has had a lot of problems lately, and you know, you also have a role to play as a person who runs a company that makes profits, and there has been a long-standing view in the country that profitability, everything flows from profitability. And yet you seem to have taken this view that really started, I think, about a year ago, that that's not the only goal, and that companies that only care about maximizing profitability are making a mistake. What I'd like to ask you is not just the why of that, but kind of where it came from. You couldn't have done this when you first came back as CEO because the company was troubled. I mean, one of the reasons you can do this is because the company's in good shape, it seems to me.
Well, I think to a degree, yes, but actually it's not true. And this didn't start a year ago. This started many, many years ago. In fact, in the late 80s, before Starbucks was a public company, we became the first company in America to provide comprehensive health insurance and equity in the form of stock options to every single employee, way before Obamacare. So I think the conscience of the company has always been trying to do the right thing. Now, you're exactly right. A company must have performance, must have the trust and confidence of its shareholders in order to do these kinds of things. But I would suggest that the success that we have enjoyed as a company, the equity of the brand, the trust that people have in Starbucks, is in large part based on the fact that we have tried as a company to exceed the expectations of our people, and in turn, our customers understand that there's more to Starbucks than just selling coffee.
When did you start to think about this particular set of ideas, which is not... let's think about it this way. There are a lot of companies that believe that treating customers well and treating employees well is a core part of their mission. And you're on the forefront of that, but you are not the only one doing that.
True.
What has changed is that you, as a CEO, and Starbucks as a company, have taken this kind of radical next step, it seems to me, and said, it's not just about what happens inside our stores, but what happens outside in our communities. That does seem different to me.
Well,
and so what I'd like to ask you is, first of all, you know, I'd like to get a feel for how that thinking came about, and then how it got put into practice.
Okay. Well, I don't want some of this to sound a little self-serving, but in order to answer the question properly, my own background growing up in public housing in Brooklyn, New York, and seeing firsthand the fracturing of the American dream and understanding sometimes the shame of being a poor kid certainly has stuck with me all these years. But in view of your question, listen, everyone in this room, whether you are a Democrat or Republican or independent, probably can agree with one statement. We all feel like there's something going wrong. There's something not right. And when I examine the debt ceiling debacle of last summer and saw the fracturing of leadership, and then I hear about $6 billion being spent between now and November on the presidential election cycle, and then I hear about $2 billion being spent a week in Afghanistan, I'm just asking myself, am I the only person in America that thinks there's something wrong with this picture? And in view of the platform that we at Starbucks have, I'm trying to ask the question and answer it in the affirmative. How can we use our scale for good? And talking to other CEOs, that we have a collective responsibility. If America is not doing well and is a fracturing of the middle class, it's not good for our business. But that's not the reason. This is not about marketing. This is not about profitability. This is about citizenship over partisanship and recognizing that we can't wait for Washington. We have to do something. And I'm just saying to myself and others that I'm going to use the megaphone that I have with civility and respect to try and create some dialogue, because there's something wrong. The country is going in the wrong direction. It's not a criticism of the president. It's not a criticism of the Republican Party. But we all know there's something not right.
So the first thing you did along these lines was this campaign to try and persuade other CEOs to stop making campaign contributions. And I wrote a column about that. And the primary response that I got from readers, especially on the left, was, Howard Schultz is asking for unilateral disarmament. Do you view that first step as kind of a failed effort and as part of a kind of groping to figure out how to come at this?
I don't view it as a failed effort. I don't think I was trying with that mission or objective to eradicate campaign contributions, but I was trying to send a powerful signal to Washington, and I think they got the message. And I think, as you know, I heard from the president asking about why I was doing this. The point was that I wanted to try and create a dialogue that this is out of control. There's something wrong. And then we followed it up by recognizing that 13.5 million people were unemployed. What can we do when the fact was that despite the TARP money, the banks were not lending and are still not lending to small businesses, which is the lifeblood of employment in America. And we started this initiative in which 800,000 people are now wearing this wristband, and we've raised millions of dollars. Again, trying to do something on behalf of the country.
So what do your directors say?
Interesting question. This was at first, I think they were a little, I wouldn't say confused, perplexed as to what is it you're trying to do here, Howard? And I have Republicans and Democrats on the board, and they were, I think, sensitive to the fact that we can't use Starbucks as a political pawn in this dialogue. But I think over time they realized that what we were trying to do was with civility and good for the country, and in the end, the lens that I asked the board to try and see this through was, would this initiative make the people of Starbucks proud? And if the answer was yes, we're on the right track. And I think everything we've done has kind of made a deposit in the reservoir of goodwill with our people. Is it your sense that customers have picked up on this and it's generated goodwill beyond the employee base and in the country at large, for that matter? Well, I think there's a seismic change in consumer behavior in a large part because of how much information they have about all things, including companies. And I think there is a great level of awareness and understanding about the initiatives that we've taken this year, and I think it's been positively received, and our business has been strong. In other words, so there aren't a bunch of Republicans who are saying, I'm never going to go to Starbucks again because... We've had a few of those.
Yeah, you have had a few of those. Yeah. But to be clear, I mean, you don't view this as a liberal or a conservative effort.
No, I've been very open the fact that I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I'm more concerned about the country than I am about the Democratic Party.
You know, one of the things that you've talked about a lot, and I think it's worth just expanding on here, is this notion that corporate values drive profitability. That it's not just how much you charge for a cup of coffee. It is Judy Samuelson, who introduced me and started this panel, is running an effort for the Aspen Institute about trying to rethink the idea that shareholder value is the only thing that matters. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow morning on a panel. But it feels to me that you have already gone in that direction, and that how do you balance shareholder value with these other values, corporate values, that may not, in fact, maximize profitability?
You know, for me, I've never seen it as a bifurcated question. I've always seen the two in parallel. But you have to perform in order to do the things that we feel are necessary to give back to the communities we serve. Saying it another way, though, is that we're living at a time right now where the level of trust and confidence in all institutions is at an all-time low. I think the approval rating of Congress is about 9.5%. I think the approval rating of banks and corporations is less than 20. People don't trust anything anymore, primarily because most things have let them down. Conversely, if a company, a brand, an institution shows up and does the right thing, that company is going to be accepted and embraced more often than not. Now, we're not the only company that's doing good things in America. But if you look at the companies that are, it wouldn't surprise you, probably wouldn't surprise you, those companies have had great performance. And I think in large part, the equity of the brand and the trust that people have in what we stand for has been elevated by these initiatives. But you should also understand, we're not a perfect company. We make mistakes, we have challenges, but we're going to yield, we're going to constantly try and yield on trying to do the moral thing and manage the company through the lens of humanity.
Now, of course, if you stumble next year, a lot of people are going to say, well, Howard spent too much time trying to save the world and not enough time trying to take care of Starbucks.
That would happen in a nanosecond, I'm sure of it. But, you know, I think I'm prepared for that, and at some point we probably will disappoint someone. But we're going to continue to do these things, because I think the overriding factor I like to communicate is I do not believe that any company in America can build a sustainable, enduring enterprise by just embracing profitability. For one thing, employees today want to work for a company that they trust, they want to be part of something larger than themselves, and they want to go home at night and share with their friends and family that they're proud of what the company stands for. The other thing is that customers are going to reject those companies who have a singular goal about profitability. It's shallow, it's not sustainable, and success is best when it's shared. That's just a fact.
Let's talk about one of the things you're doing that is, in fact, a perfect example of trying to do something that is beyond maximizing profitability. You just opened a plant in the United States, and you told me over the phone the other day that it definitely means that your costs are going to be higher. So first of all, how do you justify that? Why don't you tell folks a little bit about the plant itself and the thinking that went on behind that?
Well, I think we all know that unemployment in America is a terrible problem. I think when people do not have a job, it fractures their self-esteem. And I think overall, I think the self-esteem of the country is in question right now. But as I looked at the facts, America is down to about 9 million manufacturing jobs. Our industrial base is evaporating. After World War II, that number was 40 million manufacturing jobs. We have subordinated all those jobs for reasons of cost and efficiency. And I think when we had an opportunity to build a new facility Of course, the opportunity to build it in Asia, Mexico, was about 20% less. The operating cost would have been less. But we said to our board and our shareholders, we're going to build a facility in Augusta, Georgia. We're going to spend more money, but we're going to hire Americans. And I don't apologize for it. I think this is what American businesses need to do today to try and make a contribution back to the country.
But, you know, this does raise the question of, you know, if every other company did that, would our companies be more uncompetitive, less competitive? I mean, would it create that series of problems?
You know, I think there's other ways to take cost out of the business. And I think it's a zero-sum game that most people are looking at this, and it's the wrong decision. And the unintended consequences of all this is that we are losing manufacturing jobs, and unemployment today at 14 million people or so is a number that's going to be extraordinarily hard to solve unless we start doing something. And we can't just blame it on Washington and wait for Washington.
How many jobs will this
About 200.
Right. But that's part of the problem, too, is that in the old days, a manufacturing plant employed lots and lots of people. And I'm guessing that this plant, this is not a criticism, it's a good thing. This plant is probably highly mechanized, lots of new technology, and highly productive.
Let me give you a bigger idea then.
Okay.
Okay. I think we probably have all heard that there's a ton of money sitting on the balance sheets of most public companies that is sitting overseas. The fact is, about $2.5 trillion is sitting overseas with public companies not bringing it back to the U.S. Why? Because the tax rate currently is approximately 35%. Now, of all the things that I could think of that would be a bipartisan win for both parties, if we could create a mechanism for that money to come back at a lower tax rate, it would be an incentive for all companies to bring the money back, but you do not get the lower tax rate unless it's linked to employment of new people. Now, I know Washington wants to make everything really difficult, but I got to tell you, that is a pretty simple solution to an extraordinarily hard problem. If you divide the $2.5 trillion by $50,000 or $60,000, you would reduce the unemployment in America to about 6%. I mean, why can't we do that?
Well, that's good. Why can't we do that? I mean,
because we can't do that because we're living at a time right now where the lens in which the politicians of our country see everything is ideology, partisanship, and their own personal reelection. And the vocal minority on both sides have unfortunately captured the imagination of the country.
So how does the reasonable middle grab the country back?
Well, now you get into the sad facts that less than 50% of the country is registered to vote in 2012, and only about 60% of those people are going to vote. So we can't have it both ways. We can't sit here and complain and know something's wrong and not have our voices heard. And what we tried to do in the last couple of days is encourage people to start having a conversation. And the fact is that we have to have our voices heard. We have to get the country back by participating in a way that doesn't ignore the facts that we too have a voice in this race, and we have to embrace a democracy. And that's not going to happen with 50% of the country registered to vote.
You know, yesterday, Eric Schmidt spoke over at Greenwald, and he was surprisingly optimistic about how our politics will play out down the line. When I talk to you here and elsewhere, you sound frustrated. You sound frustrated. And it's hard also to be, if you're CEO of a big company, you sort of have to be an optimist. That just kind of comes with the territory. And so I guess what I'd like to ask you is, when you think about our country in this terrible moment, are you ultimately optimistic, or is the frustration getting the better of you?
I think I'm optimistic about the future of the country. If I freeze this moment in time, I'm frustrated and concerned about the leadership of the country and the need for political courage, the need for truth-telling, and the need for action. I do believe that at some point, people are going to realize that we have to stop arguing and stop fighting over things that don't matter and fix the things that really do. So, long term, I'm optimistic. I'm trying to do my part, but I'm certainly frustrated and concerned about the future of the country as I sit here today.
Why aren't more CEOs doing what you're doing?
Good question. I can't speak for lots of people. I think hired CEOs are concerned about fiduciary responsibility, shareholders, and the board. And also, I think the country today is very fragile, and people are more concerned about their personal performance than they are about these issues. When I speak to people privately, the level of concern is as high as what I've expressed today, but it's very difficult to get people to sign up.
I heard Jeff Immelt say last year at Ohio State, if they could only just do one bipartisan thing.
I think you're 100% right.
Do you think that your role as a kind of outside voice, a corporate executive, do you think this is your highest, best use in terms of trying to change the politics of the country, as opposed to running for office or something like that?
I'm not a politician, and I don't have any desire to run for office. I think I do have a platform. Starbucks is in every community in America, and I'm trying to use the trust people have in our brand to try and make a difference. And I think we will continue to do things that kind of elevate the conversation. Where this is going to go from here, I don't know, but I think we're not going to be a bystander. We're going to continue to try and use our scale for good.
Before we turn it over to questions, I want to just talk to you a little bit. You have a letter running in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times this weekend. I'm not sure if they're going to, given the way this is structured, I'm not sure that they're going to be able to show it. You want to just bring it? Oh, wow. Yes, I do. That would be wonderful.
We took a full-page ad out in the Wall Street Journal today, the New York Times tomorrow, and USA Today on Monday. And the ad is basically an open letter to America about the fact that as July 4th comes and we celebrate July 4th, there's things that we should be concerned about that we want to raise. And then we're going to use social media to try and elevate a very large conversation in America.
So the idea is you, the customers of Starbucks, concerned Americans, we're going to provide a place for you to voice your concerns and express the kind of country you think we should.
And not only voice your concerns, we'd also like you to share your ideas with us, heroic stories with us, and Starbucks will package all of this, and I think we're going to get tens of thousands of submissions. And we're going to raise awareness about this, and hopefully the people who are in charge will see this. And again, this is a mechanism to try and start a conversation and make a difference.
I would love to, we've got lots of time, like a half an hour. I always feel like the audience gets short shrift and so I really would like people to have time to ask questions, and then maybe I'll ask a follow-up. And so hands, please. Sir with the suit jacket? Yes.
Hi.
Can I just say one quick thing first? I have found in the sessions that I've been on that they work better even if you make a statement that it leads to a question. So that's the one thing I'm really going to ask.
Great. My name is Mark Hannett, and I'm working to expand the supply of organ donors in the U.S. And thinking a lot about what you said in this letter, it sounds, especially with Citizens United, money is a main vehicle for people to voice and leverage pressure on politicians, existing and future ones. So I'm wondering, I'm really interested in your strategy and your thinking on leverage and impact. Instead of taking money out of the system, why not create, let's say, a moderate politician PAC, where there's a huge incentive for future politicians to get money, PAC money, if they stop going for the extreme ends, instead of having to always cater to the extreme sides. So I'm curious on your thinking, why not create a moderate politician PAC?
Well, first off, I think we all should recognize that the money that is being spent, in large part by both parties, and the amount of individual contributions coming from certain people to leverage their own position or buy an office is not something that should be viewed by anyone in this room, or for that matter the country, as being compatible with the democracy that the Founding Fathers had for the country. I mean, asked another way, should anyone in America be allowed to buy a Senate seat or a congressional seat or the presidency? And see the amount of money that is being spent, and I mentioned before, over $6 billion is going to be spent. I mean, just pause for a moment and think about that. The issue of us establishing our own PAC to try and do good things and goodwill around the things that I've spoken about, I think is a possibility. But I also think it goes in the direction that is inconsistent, at least for me personally, with what I think is an atrocious way of what's happening now between this election cycle.
So I'm guessing, were opposed to the Citizens United decision, even though...
I am absolutely opposed to it. I think it was, in view of where the country is headed, a very dangerous, damaging decision for the country. Right there.
Hello, thank you so much, Howard, for the inspiration of what you've done. I'm Carol Siegel. I'm a philanthropist and the president of a foundation. I am a proud owner of one of your bracelets. Every time I go into the coffee shop and to Starbucks, I do buy a bracelet because I do believe in the power of one. Of course, I'd like to know what's the response?
Yes.
How's it going? Who watches it? What's the distribution like? Who manages the distribution? How many people have you touched? Has it reached your expectations?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the support. Let's just rewind the clock a little bit. When unemployment reached over 9% and the numbers came out, I started making some calls to people that I know, and I really wanted to find out specifically if, in fact, the banks were lending to small businesses. And I have friends who are bankers. I like them personally. I socialize with them, but I think their policy today is less than admirable. And I found out that in fact, the small businesses were having great difficulty getting access to credit that they once did. So in view of that, we did some homework, and literally in a 45-day period, we uncovered an organization in Philadelphia called the Opportunity Finance Network. Think of them as the united way of community banks across the country that they vet, and those community banks provide low-interest loans to small businesses, startup businesses, even 501(c)s. The money that we've raised, about 800,000 people are wearing the wristband. Starbucks donated $5 million. Citibank, Banana Republic, and Google have joined us as partners. They've all contributed millions of dollars. We'll have more partners in the future. But the big idea here is that as a result of the dollars that we raise, it is a multiple of 7x because of the equity they can raise on top of that and loaning and being able to loan against it. And we have loaned out millions of dollars to small businesses across the country, and the Opportunity Finance Network, based in Philadelphia, is kind of the vetting organization to ensure the fact that there is 100% transparency. There's no admin fee. Starbucks takes nothing. All the money goes back to the small businesses.
Can you see the effect in job creation?
Yeah, we've created about 5,000 jobs, as a result of the initiative. Now again, you hear about 14 million people unemployed. We're going to create 200 jobs in Georgia, and we've created 4,000 jobs, and people can say, God, that's all. But we can't wait. We have to do something. And you said it best, it's the power of one. When I talk to some of these businesses that have been able to start up as a result of this initiative, we've changed the lives of people. And that's what we have to do.
In the back.
Good morning, Howard. My name is Nicholas Richards. I'm the assistant pastor at Abyssinian Church.
Oh,
so thank
wow.
you so much for the work that you are doing with us.
You work for a great man.
I do. Tell him I said that. The question that I have for you is, it seems that the corporate values really reflect CEO values. So was there certain experiences that led you to have the values that you have now?
You know, I grew up in Brooklyn in public housing, and when I was about 7 years old, for about a year and a half, my family lost health insurance. And I think that scarred me, that shaped me, and then, you know, we all carry our childhood experiences with us, and so I have a deep level of concern and sensitivity to all these people who are being left behind, and I think that's why. The truth is that you know, corporate CEOs and public companies and even banks to a certain degree, people want to do the right thing. I think we have to create the atmosphere and we got to create the foundation for people to feel as if they can do the things that are good for the country without shareholders or board members or constituents saying you're doing this at the expense of shareholder value. And the story that we want to keep telling at Starbucks is that we believe strongly that the value creation of a record revenue year and record profits this last 12 months is in part due to the values of Starbucks.
Can I just say one quick thing here? Howard, in some senses, is a little bit lucky in that he's the founder. You know, he's not just the CEO. He's not a hired gun. He didn't rise to the ranks of a corporation or get hired from the outside by a board of directors that had just fired its CEO.
That's true.
And if you are a CEO that's in that circumstance, you do feel more constrained. And until Howard and other people like Howard can lead the way to a different kind of thinking about what corporate values are, there's no way the hired gun CEO is going to follow until he sees that other people are doing it, it's becoming accepted, academics start to write about it, and link corporate value to profitability and so on. And that's really what it takes. And I hadn't really thought about this before, but it does seem to me that Howard is trying to show that there is this other way, but he also has the freedom to do that because he built this company.
A lot of questions.
Right there, sir.
Howard, my name is Jim Brandt. I'm a retired executive from Honeywell. Back in the 60s and 70s under Ed Spencer, we talked about shareholder value and stakeholder value, and it really was very much a part of our culture. I don't see that much different from what you're trying to do, and I commend you in what you're trying to do. In the 80s, well, really the 90s, we saw the immersion of monotonically increasing profit goals. And I think it really changed the culture of management in many of the country, particularly the large companies. You haven't addressed, and this is my question, what can we do to in fact motivate your underlings, your junior managers, your junior executives, to understand that shareholder value and stakeholder value are really the same thing, and will build a community as well as the business?
I think it's a very important point to make because it's not just about one person. It has to be about the culture and kind of guiding principles of the company. If I felt this way alone and the board didn't support it, and the members of our team didn't support it, it wouldn't be executed because one person can't carry this kind of torch. And when I think about a culture of a company or a culture of organization, it's very much like, believe it or not, raising a young child, because there's an imprinting process that goes on in imprinting people with what we stand for. And the business has a memory, and the memory is the way things have been done. So when one person does something that's inconsistent with the culture and values, it stands out. And I think that what we've tried to do at Starbucks, and many other companies are the same, is recognizing that the profitability, the strategy, and the execution of the company is the manifestation of its guiding principles. And you can't have one without the other. Now, there are some companies whose culture and goal is just to make money. That's their business. And certainly there are financial institutions like that. But we've all seen in the last year or so in which many people who work for those companies feel as if that's no longer sustainable and not enduring. And that's why when I started, I feel as if that there are signs, signals, that things are changing. They won't change fast, but they are changing. And people recognize in all industries, in many, many companies, that there has to be a balance between profitability and a social responsibility.
What do you think generally of the corporate social responsibility movement? I mean, to be honest, I'm fairly skeptical that it's real as opposed to, public relations.
Well, I think the catch term in the last 5 years has been CSR, corporate social responsibility. And CSR is not writing a check and issuing a press release about a contribution you just made to some community. The CSR group in a company must have a seat at the big table, like every other department and discipline. It has to be integrated into the company. When it's outside, it's an afterthought, and it's not real. And I agree with you. I have some cynicism myself when I see some of the things that come out. But I think most companies today recognize, just like HR and just like other disciplines, social and digital media is a new discipline, that there has to be an integration into the entire company in which corporate responsibility is part of what the company stands for. And I think that's happening more today than in the past.
How about, oh, yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I don't want to take the mic away from you.
Thank you. My name is Sam Tyler. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I have a two-part question. Washington being as broken as it is and looking like it will be into the future leads me to think that a third party might be a solution to bringing forward the kind of change that has been implied today, and that I think we would all like, Republican or Democrat, the fact that we need to have something different. My question is this: Howard, how do you feel about a third-party movement coming along in the next few years with some real power and teeth to it? And then secondly, I think of people who really have done important things in the corporate world in terms of change, like Lee Iacocca rescuing Chrysler, but nobody could ever get him to run. Bloomberg building that tremendous business he has. At least he's been a mayor, but he wouldn't run for president. How do we get people who are so clearly effective in the corporate level dealing with complicated problems into government more? And would they be the key candidates in a third party?
I think these are two very important questions. Sometimes when you're on stage and you've got to answer important questions, you're viewed as someone who's an expert. And I'm not an expert on either one of those questions, but I'm going to try my best. I'm deeply concerned with the direction the country's going. And as I travel around the world, Starbucks is in 58 countries, people are talking to me about what happened to America. The world needs America. What happened to the promise of America, the idealism of America? And that's not a Republican or a Democratic issue. It's an issue that we all understand. I think when we see it, we embrace it, and when we don't, we reject it. I think we're getting to a point in America today where we are rejecting the basic fundamental aspects of our political system. The one great litmus test is that less than 50% of registered voters are going to vote in this election. That sounds like a rejection of the system to me. So perhaps someone will emerge who will galvanize the country that people will trust for the right reasons. I don't think you need a business background, in answer to your second question, to be qualified to run for president, or that gives you an advantage. What I think we need is a group of people, Democrat or Republican or Independent, who are of like-minded values, who are leaving their personal ideology and partisanship aside and putting their feet in the shoes of everyday Americans and understand that they were sent to Washington to represent the country, not a special interest. And until the country and our people send that message, we're going to continue to have the same broken system we have. I think, to me, what frustrated me the most in the last year or so was when the president commissioned Simpson Bowles to go out and create a solution for the debt ceiling crisis and really examine how, in a bipartisan way, to fix these very, very difficult, complex problems. Well, why go out and commission that with two very respected people on both sides of the aisle and reject it? And I'd have to think it was rejected because it wasn't good politics. And I think this is what's wrong. And so the short answer to your question is, we are on a collision course in which something is going to change. How it's going to change, who's going to change it, when it's going to change, I think is up to us. And I think I'm here speaking about these things. I suspect that all of you at one time or another have felt something like this, that there's something wrong. Is this the country that our parents and our grandparents sacrificed so much for when we have these kinds of structural problems and inequities in our country? I think not.
Thank you. Jonathan Halpern with Designing Sustainability. I want to pick up on the question that was posed here about CEO values and organizational values, but also frame it a little differently, because I'd really love to hear your thoughts on perceptions of time. Because from one perspective, buying coffee mugs for 20% more doesn't make any sense from a short-term perspective. But my hunch is that you have a much longer-term perspective in which that does make a lot of sense. And to pick up on Nocera's point, yes, your situation in terms of being the founder of Starbucks is very unique, but if you look at the other end of the spectrum, Paul Pullman at Unilever doesn't report quarterly earnings anymore, and he's announced publicly that he doesn't want to take hedge fund money. So you've got two CEOs in very different situations doing somewhat similar things. So I'd be curious very much to hear your thoughts.
I mentioned earlier, we've been a public company for 20 years. And during that time, the most significant change in running a public company is the unbelievable short-term mentality of Wall Street institutions and financial investors. And let me put it in perspective. I think when we went public 20 years ago, I have a good friend of mine, Dave Fuente, in the front who was the CEO of Office Depot. We've talked many times about this. Maybe 3, 4, 5 months max was the mentality in terms of quarter to quarter. I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say, literally, we're talking 5 minutes now. And what I mean by that, if I issued a press release tomorrow that there was any indication of a slowdown or something was wrong in any part of our business, our stock would drop 10%, 5%. And I'd have 100 phone calls, I'd have the media, and all of a sudden, the bloom is off the rose and the story would begin. And we have to manage through that lens because it's real, and we have a responsibility to shareholders. Now, not like any other constituency, you have to try and build trust and confidence with that group. And it goes back to what I said earlier about performance. I think there are companies, there are public CEOs who are given that license based on years of relationships, confidence, and performance. But the truth of the matter is that 90% of public companies today are held under a microscope that is a short-term mentality that is extraordinarily difficult to navigate against. And I think that's why you'll see less companies going public and some public companies going private. I have a very good friend, the CEO of Procter & Gamble, a fantastic CEO, Bob McDonald, world class. And they're killing him because he's fighting against the headwinds of Europe. Well, Europe is underwater. He can't sell more soap. and they're destroying the guy. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unfair. So I don't have an answer for you, just describing the landscape, which is very, very difficult. And that's why you need board members to support the CEO's long-term strategy and stand up to the short-term mentality when the stock goes down.
Christy Hefner, and I'm told I was the longest-serving female CEO of a public company ever. But I want to build on the point you just made, Howard, because if we're going to redefine shareholder value, who our shareholders are is a critical ingredient. So I wonder what you think about potential changes in the systems, such as requiring a period of time of holding the stock to have the same vote. Are there things we could do structurally that would help to bring about a better alignment for long-term shareholder value creation?
Christy, I think that would be more difficult than getting campaign finance reform. But maybe the two of us can try and do both. I think Wall Street would reject that, has rejected that. And, not only do we have traditional holders, we now have day traders that are using algorithms and computer programs in which traders are trading within seconds. And that's why the mentality of the street is so different today. You don't know who's holding the stock. You don't know the momentum of the stock and how it's being treated. And it's hard to even pinpoint the cause and the effect of the stock going up or down sometimes. So great idea, but extraordinarily difficult to do.
Howard, let me ask very quickly. If you said in a previous answer that you have a responsibility to shareholders. But you've also said, maximizing profitability is not or should not be at this point in time the ultimate goal of a corporation, that it has a series of goals that it has to manage. What then is the responsibility to shareholders? What is it?
Well, the responsibility to shareholders is to create value for them, to do it in an honest, transparent way, and not to do it in a way that would be inconsistent with the values of the company. Now, when a shareholder buys a share of stock in a company, they have done some homework and they understand what the growth rate is, they understand what the guidance is, and they understand what the company has said about its other responsibilities. So there shouldn't be any surprises. But let me rephrase something so there's no misunderstanding. I do not believe that any company, including Starbucks, should sacrifice profitability for social responsibility. I believe we have to do both. And I think the attempt that we've tried to do over the years, not always perfectly, is to do both. But if we can't make a profit due to a social issue or an endeavor, then we're not going to be able to do that. The question is, how do we do both?
Over here.
I'll speak loud. My name is Jonathan Weiler, and I'm from San Francisco, and I am one of those hired guns. And so I work for I run about a 400-person services company run by all private equity guys. And the question to Howard is, how do you change the minds of smart guys like Joe? Because he keeps asking the question of, is it profits or social responsibility? So my 2 data points are as follows. The third most viewed page on our website is our social responsibility page. which just speaks volumes. So first of all, it's the homepage. Secondly, it's jobs. And third, it's social responsibility. So I think there's some of the conversation here that we're just trying to catch up with the public because our website views are sort of how just a common guy looks and is looking at organizations. They care about that. The third point is, the second point is we're always trying to find the right kind of talent. And the best person I hired after going through I've been at the company 2 years trying to turn it around, so I've been through 3 VPs of sales. Finally, I get a star, and when she talked about the job, the sole reason she came, what brought our company to her attention is that we made a very modest donation to a Down syndrome foundation. And she just said, I work for a soulless company, the place is terrible, I see you guys doing this, and she basically called me up to say, can I come work for a company that does this? And so people get into the cost benefit of it, and when my investors get on my back about it, it's just say it's a no-brainer, because the benefits of these activities for the people that you serve and your employees far outweigh any kind of cost. It's hard to quantify from a traditional accounting standpoint, but those are the facts, and like I said, I think what your employees see the same thing, that the people, there's a groundswell of support or desire on the part of people to get that meaning in their lives.
That's a great comment. Howard, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think I couldn't have said it any better.
Back here? Okay. Is the mic on?
Okay. Yeah, good
There we
morning. My name is Shelly Porges. I'm the Director of the Global Entrepreneurship Program at the U.S. Department of State. Thank you so much for your leadership on all of these issues. The Kaufman Foundation for Entrepreneurship, as I'm sure you know, has identified with a rather vast amount of research that all net new jobs are created by young companies starting up. And you yourself, as a founder of a company that has created thousands and thousands of jobs, I'm wondering what you would think about what is the most important thing we can be doing as a country, whether it's the private sector, the public sector, to, again, foster the formation of young jobs. In this past recession, it's the first recession where new companies formations has declined, which is very, very troubling given the statistic that young companies, new companies, are the ones that really create all the net new jobs.
Well, I'm convinced that, first of all, I agree with you 100% that in the research that we've done, about 65% of job creation in America is small businesses, the engine of job creation. But small businesses have to be funded. And I'm repeating myself a little bit, but their access to credit at this time in America, despite all the money that the banks got, is not consistent with what the banks are saying. And as I have spoken directly to small businesses trying to create a business or sustain their business, their number one issue is access to credit. And I didn't talk about this earlier, we just actually reopened a ceramics factory in East Liverpool, Ohio, to make mugs for us in the United States. And in talking to the founder of that business, who had less than 30 days to go on his payments, he could not survive because the banks wouldn't give him a $50,000 loan. This was an existing business that was getting ready to shut down. So the issue is that the government and the banks must put in place a process and a commitment to lending to small businesses. That's what we must do.
We've got time for a couple more questions. You've had your hand up a long time, sir, so you're it.
Good morning. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Howard. I'm a CEO as well, public companies and private companies. I'm in the private arena now with private equity backers. When I went public, against the advice of investment bankers, I always led with our vision, our values, and told the investors what our metrics would be, meaning long-term sustainable value, and made it clear that we were going to run the company one way and not the other. I fully agree with your comment that it's the responsibility of boards, I think, to give the CEOs the space so that the leadership of CEOs can show itself as you are doing. My question, though, is how are you engaging the institutional investors? What are you saying? And what kind of pushback are you getting? And just how is that conversation both framed and going? Thanks.
As Joe indicated, I returned to the CEO position at Starbucks in 2008 during the cataclysmic financial crisis and our own self-induced mistakes. And we were under tremendous pressure. And in the first 6 months or so, we were starting to cut costs at Starbucks. And the one cost that was just something I would not entertain was health care for our people. Well, one afternoon I got a phone call from an institutional investor who I've known for 10 plus years. And he was a big holder of our stock. And the conversation went something like this: Howard, you have all the cover in the world. No one is going to criticize you. Every company is either cutting out or reducing the health care premium. This is the time to cut health care insurance at Starbucks. Now, that was a $200 million line item. Currently, it's $260. And I told the shareholder, listen, we would fracture the trust of the entire company if we took that health care benefit away. It's a non-starter. We're not going to do it. And I said to him, not with arrogance or hubris, I just said, listen, if you feel as if you can no longer hold the stock as a result of this conversation, then you should sell it. A week later, their holdings in Starbucks was half what it was prior to that conversation. So he got out. And I think, you got to be true to what you believe in. You got to have faith and confidence in your core purpose. I applaud you for leading with the institutional investors with your values. But your values and guiding principles can't be with you when you only have a tailwind. They have to be with you when you're tested. And your people are watching. And they know, well, it's true.
One more question, but it's got to be one of these things where Howard answers yes or no, because we're basically out of time. There you go.
This might be a little longer than a yes or no question, but I'll keep it short. My name is Chris Saban. I'm a Bezos Scholar here at the Aspen Institute. You touched on the lack of voter registration and voter participation, and that's something that I experienced firsthand that has made me very passionate about this subject. I want to know, is there anything you're doing to actively reverse this trend? And if so, can I get involved?
Starbucks does have to be somewhat careful not to engage too much in the political process, but we are asking ourselves candidly, what can we do to aid in the ability of people to register to vote? So stay tuned, and I'll get your name. We'll get back to you.
Thank you all very much, and thanks especially to Howard Schultz.
Thank you very much.
Who is an inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you.